preacher's daughter.
And I'm Eden, and I'm also a preacher's daughter.
And this is Gay Girls, Good God.
Christian content from a queer perspective.
Once again, we said, you know, it would be a great idea if we took a couple tequila shots before we start the pod.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm a good Christian girl. I would never drink vodka and tequila together.
This is definitely the idea of a sober kale, putting the hair in a full side part.
You are giving full emo fantasy. You're giving very much raw XD.
You're giving like a fire pit party.
Fire pit party.
Like, you know, like in high school, they used to be called like, I think field parties or whatever.
Okay.
Whenever they would do a bonfire, like someone would have a bunch of land and they would do bonfire in the field. That's what my mom used to go to in high school. There was a singular one that I went to in high school.
Okay, see, my country ass, we had bonfires. I only like went to one or two in my entire high school career because get this, at my conservative country high school, I was not very popular. I know, it's crazy. It's crazy, I know. But yeah, they were just called bonfires, and people would that was their version of a house party.
Well, they are bonfires, but I always heard my mom call them field parties, and so in my brain, like, she was the first person to introduce me to that concept, so it's forever cemented in my brain as a field party.
Field party. That gives me like white party, but like everyone's dressed as wheat.
My mom was from DeSoto County in the 90s, so it was very white. I think it was before DeSoto County like really exploded because it's right by Memphis. Mm-hmm. So, and that's where I lived for 6 months, by the way, viewers. I lived right outside Memphis for a few months. It was
basically
fun.
A local.
Basically.
Yeah.
Go Grizzlies. So anyway, Sister Eden, what are you praying for on this lovely Sunday evening?
Well, Sister Kale, this lovely Sunday evening, I am praying for, I think, the service workers. Especially Starbucks workers.
Those red cups.
Those red cups, girl. Because we are now officially in the holiday season. Mm-hmm. And for those of you who have blessedly never had to work a food service or retail job, first of all, fuck you. Second of all, the holiday season is always so busy and so stressful, and everyone's nerves are so high strung. So they're very abusive towards service workers. Let's just say, at my job, things have been rough lately. Yeah. So I am praying for y'all. I know it's tough. Stay strong, sister. We're almost to January. And you will get there.
There is nothing a white middle-aged woman gets more heated about than her coffee order.
Don't even
I would say I'm preaching to the choir here because you know it better than I do.
Oh, yeah.
I am praying for y'all too. I always think of that one meme where it's that Starbucks worker crying in the corner and the other person has their hand on their shoulders.
No, that's literally me in the back, like, and the other, like, my coworkers. If any of my coworkers are listening or watching, first of all, get out. This is humiliating. Go, please stop. Literally. Which I know for a fact some of them do. I'm so sorry.
You can stay, I guess.
But second of all, thank you so much for supporting me and my transsexual ass as I get through every single shift.
In Southern Georgia.
Yeah, I be crying and shit. But I'm praying for y'all. How about you, Sister Kayla? Who are you praying for?
I am praying for all of my brothers and sisters in Christ who suffer from lactose intolerance.
So I noticed that you excluded non-binary people.
You know what?
So why do you hate non-binary people?
My brothers, sisters, and thisters in Christ.
My brothers, sisters, and they, them.
In Christ, of course. That's the most important part.
They're inside Jesus.
Yeah. Oh. Well, that's another episode. That is another investigation episode.
Let me stop interrupting you. Go ahead.
I am praying for everyone who is lactose intolerant because I am a girl who loves cheese. I love to cook in cheese. I love a soupy cheese. Yes. I love a cheesy soup. I mean, not a soupy cheese. What's soupy cheese?
You love guzzling like nacho
cheese. I like queso blanco right down the throat. But I am praying for everyone who loves a cheesy meal, loves to put cheese on top of everything, but about an hour later, their stomach is in peril because I know exactly how that feels, and it's not fun to have just had a great sensory experience of eating this yummy, cheesy, warm soup, and then a little while later, you're like, shouldn't have done that.
We are American, so we are obsessed with eating cheese on everything. But as two lactose intolerant queens, we do understand the cost.
And we also do love ice cream.
I love ice cream so much.
There's like nothing. It's kind of like how I feel about smoking weed. It's like after the best day, I was like, you know what would make this better? Ice cream.
The worst nights of my life have been made better by being like, I'm so sad and depressed. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get exactly.
I'm going to get a mint Oreo shake.
You know me too well.
We have the same order.
Exactly.
The first time we went to cook out together was like, that's when we knew.
Everything that we do together, we're like, oh my God, you're the same person.
And then we're surprised every time.
Yeah, like, who would have thought?
Oh, of course we understand each other's feelings. What do you mean?
Just before we started filming, we were just talking about how, like, not only are we soulmates, more importantly, we are each other's camera. Whenever a moment happens and you gotta...
Yeah, you have to, like, be like, do you see this?
You see this shit, Carol?
Are you seeing this shit, Eden?
It's very bad. It's very bad.
So, Sister Eden, what do you have for us today?
I have a doozy for you today. Today, we are going to be discussing one thing that we have briefly discussed on the pod before, and I think comes up in any conversation about Christianity, post-deconstruction, and that is religious guilt.
Oh my God. Because... this is something that plagues both of us.
Yes, I think religious guilt, like, acutely and broadly is a phenomenon that many, if not most of us, are aware of. Especially, like, as Americans, the majority of our nation is, like, Christian, and if not Christian, still religious, Abrahamic religions especially.
Christians by culture,
friends by choice. But the religious guilt, as I'll get more into later, is kind of baked into that. So we all have kind of these, like, difficulties and issues plaguing us and crawling around in our minds, but we often don't have the language to identify and discuss it.
Yeah, there's really just now becoming conversation around it.
Yeah. Like, last week we talked a little bit about rapture anxiety, and it's kind of like that. Only now that we're having, like, first millennials and now Gen Z coming up as a heavily secularized generation compared to former ones, we are now more able to broadly and widely discuss these phenomenon as a culture and on a societal level.
One thing about our generation, we're going to fucking analyze. We're going to analyze that shit.
Mama, it's because we have no other agency. All we can do is critique and analyze and talk about, because the fuck are we going to do? Direct action? That sounds scary.
What do you mean?
Anyways. Without further ado, let me jump into religious guilt a moment. So, basically, for the function of this discussion, I would like to kind of define it as a sense of shame or wrongdoing concerning real or imagined transgression that does not cause any actual material harm. Yeah.
Right off the bat.
So this can be just a general and like low-key vibe in your gut at all times. This can be
the vibes.
This can be the background radiation of guilt throughout your life, or it can be an acute moment in which you get that pit in your stomach and you're like, I did something wrong. There's something wrong with me, and this is cosmically unjust. Even if you can't really point to, like, this is who I hurt, or this is who I harmed, or this is the thing that I did wrong. It's just like, I am wrong.
Which I think in and of itself is a form of complex PTSD.
Oh, bitch, we'll get to that.
Okay, word.
Oh, we'll get to that.
So think about therapy notes out.
Yeah, in the culture, I think we've had a lot of discussion about, like, we have the phrase, like, Catholic guilt, especially people be like, Catholic guilt.
Yeah.
But in general, we also, like, I think we need to talk more about just Christian guilt and religious guilt in general. But let's do a little bit more of a deep dive into it. Specifically today, I want to discuss it in terms of, like, the process through which this religious guilt is created in the individual, the lasting and long-term effects of religious guilt, and more like our own personal experiences with religious guilt.
So do I need to pay you the copay now or later for this therapy session?
So I accept insurance.
Okay, do you take TRICARE?
I don't take anything. I just say that I accept it on my website, and then once you get it, I demand cash.
We'll accept a room and board.
For now.
Word.
Oh my God. Going to a therapist and them being like, I only accept cash. You're like, I'm broke. And they're like, okay, I'm going to FaceTime your mom real quick. Imagine your card declines at the therapist's office and they send you back to Sunday school.
God.
Oh, your God, bitch.
Not mine. I'm sorry. Oh, some God.
Oh, their God.
Oh, their God.
When I say, oh my God, and like a religious coworker is like, oh no, not that. I'm like, first of all,
I have to really watch myself when I'm at family. Maybe with my bang, just say that. I have to really watch myself.
Move my bang so I can see real quick. First of all, I don't watch myself. I see myself. Moving on.
Okay,
so first, talking about the process by which religious guilt is caused, I'm going to jump right into it. One of the most interesting things I read in researching religious guilt was this 2022 article by Alison Downey. Its title was Christian Shame and Religious Trauma. It was in the journal Religions, and it had a lot to say about the way like guilt is manufactured in Christian communities, especially in the United States, and the way that it can fit within the idea of religious trauma itself, which is a whole different discussion, a whole different episode. And I can say that is a whole different discussion episode because one of the main conclusions of this article is that religious guilt is not caused by specific abuse or like spiritual abuse or spiritual traumatic events, but is rather caused by theological interpretations themselves. Ooh. So if you grow up, basically this article through its investigation found that people who grow up in religious communities, especially Christians specifically, who have theological interpretations of the scripture as guilt-driven motivators, then you are going to suffer from what she calls chronic guilt throughout your life. Which is definitely like kind of what we discuss in general of this feeling of like, I have done something wrong, even if I can't directly point to it. Or what I think is more important, especially when we're talking about chronic guilt, I am fundamentally a bad person, even if I can't prove it.
Can I ask a question real quick? Can you explain?
No. Okay. Go ahead.
Can you explain to me by interpretations? Because my brain is kind of taking that as like, that kind of feels like victim blaming, but I know it's not. But can you explain like what you mean by interpretations?
Yes. So I would say it's not victim blaming because what we're talking about is communities in which the religious leaders promote like guilt-driven interpretations of the scripture itself.
So the interpretation of someone else has been indoctrinated into us?
Yes.
Okay, that makes more sense.
For instance, if you go to like, let's use like homosexuality as an example, because this is Christian content from a queer perspective, baby. Jail. Okay. If you go to like an affirming church or whatever, where the pastor is a woman and there are queer people that go there and they're like, we are here to teach Jesus' love. Like homosexuality has nothing to do with Christianity.
Shout out University Baptist in Hattiesburg.
Shout out University Baptist in Hattiesburg. And they're like, this was just based on misinterpretations of the Bible. Like the actual religion of Christianity like supports queer people. We love you. Christianity is more of a religion about love and support and community and things like that.
Which is,
that would not promote guilt because that community like does not found itself on guilty motivations to control people's behavior.
Okay.
Whereas a like church or a church community wherein the pastor and the leading religious figures and just the ideology around the culture itself is like, homosexuality is a sin, and if you engage in homosexuality, you're going to hell. And like, if you are homosexual, you are fundamentally living outside of God's word. That is employing guilt to then control the behavior of homosexual people to say, do not engage in that. You are evil. You are bad.
So it's more of a system of interpretation rather than an individual interpretation.
Exactly. It's not that the individual interprets it in a guilty way and thus feels guilty. It is the community interprets it in a guilty way and thus makes the individual feel guilty. Okay,
excellent. Just continue.
No, that was a great clarifying question.
I was great at asking questions in high school.
Okay.
I was a pleasure to have in class.
Pleasure to have in class. Bitch. Okay. I also, moving on from this article, another key component to the way that this system of guilt is manufactured in individuals is through the dominant kind of ideology within Christianity that has emerged in the United States through the last few hundred years, which is another thing from a few weeks ago, Calvinism. So as we need a dedicated episode to Calvinism sometime soon. Because it is a very like, it's a modernist, strict, laying out of Christian ideology and values proposed by John Calvin that like has pushed forward the ideology and also the practice of Christianity in the modern world, especially the United States and the United Kingdom, in ways that cannot even be articulated.
And also Calvinism, at least in my brain, is so distinctly linked to capitalism.
Yes.
Which needs to be talked about.
Which Mama, and you know I want to talk about it.
I know you do. Former economics major.
It has been successful because it is linked to capitalism. Because like as Marx discusses often, society can basically be divided into the base and superstructure. To put it extremely simply, the base is the economic system, the superstructure is every other part of human culture and society that follows after, and the superstructure always serves to support that base.
Yes.
The religion that is going to be successful under capitalism is the religion that's ideology supports capitalism.
Yes.
And that is Calvinist Christianity.
Right.
All of this to say, Calvinism kind of pushes forward the idea that fundamentally mankind is evil, wicked, and is born like disgusting. We as creatures fundamentally are evil, are ontologically evil.
Yes.
Every action that we do is inherently selfish and is going to harm others and disgrace God. And another Calvinist principle is the idea that we need divine grace, the divine grace of a conversion specifically, to overcome this evil nature of ours. That we like, this conversion creates this also underclass of the guilty. They're like, if you have been converted, now you live in the glory of God.
Yeah.
Now you are a child of the light. Now you have accepted Christ, and that even though you sin continuously, yes, yeah. And if you have not yet been converted, even as Calvinism claims is not something that you can choose to do, then you are lesser than.
Yeah.
You are, the scum of the earth, and you have not even been given the grace that washes you clean. So you should feel disgusting about yourself.
And like you said in the colonialism episode, it's very much like creates that us versus them mentality.
Very that. And it creates a distinct in-group and out-group between Christians and non-Christians.
Right.
And within that, it creates a distinct in-group and out-group between the converted and the unconverted. And you have to think of what does it do, what to motivate like the in-group to behave a certain way and the out-group to behave a certain way. It motivates the in-group to follow the like religious doctrines strictly, to engage in their like salvation to prove it or whatever. The law is a double-edged sword, et cetera, whereas it forces the out-group to first of all treat themselves and think of themselves as lesser than,
right,
and fucking basically like know your place. If you are in the religious community and you have not yet claimed to have experienced this conversion, then you yourself are basically like saying you do not have the authority to make any moral, ethical, community claims,
right,
because you do not commune with God in the way that we do. Anyways, so Calvinism, kind of this baked in sense of guilty interpretations of like the literature, in this case the Bible, are ways that this guilt is bred. And then also something that like sociologist Emil Durkheim often talks about is that like religion is itself is a system of social control and constraint. So religion is used to, create law and order, to generate and construct morality. And that Christianity, throwing it a little bit more Foucault, as always, is also used specifically by those in power to classify basically politically detestable action as ontologically immoral.
Yes, which we touched on a lot.
Yeah. Yes. So if you are a system in which men and wealthy people are in power, like white, wealthy men, cis, straight white men are in power, and their religion then would obviously go to support the idea that if you were engaging in things like queerness or socialist like distribution of wealth or things like that, that you are inherently engaging in something that is fundamentally evil, because you cannot prove on any material level that it is wrong. So you have to have systems of social control supported by your social power, like religion, to then say, well, it's evil because it's evil.
It's the fallback.
Mama.
Like God said so.
Fallback Boy.
Yeah. My favorite band.
My favorite band, Fallback Boy.
I love their song God Said So.
God said so. God said so. Gay girls, good God. Our tagline, God said so. No, but for real, they love to say that. It's too much. So I think one of the main argument I would like to put forward in like this episode, and basically supported by these points I've made. My English training in me is like, I have to make an argument.
Your speech debate is coming out right now. My argument here, what are we arguing?
So my argument is, I think one of the most important...
Me coming directly to the mic. Bitch. Have fun editing that audio.
Well, I think that like... one of the most important things to deduce and to interpret from these facts is that Christianity as a religion, and also I would say a lot of other Abrahamic religions, specifically Islam, though we are not like as qualified to speak on that.
Right.
Basically, it like shame is integral to the way that it works, because the way that it works is that it makes natural desires shameful through social power, and then sells itself as the only solution to that shame. So by calling things like homosexuality, sex before marriage, desiring people, a lot of things around sex, first of all.
Oh,
I'm always
absolutely.
going towards those. And also like gluttony, the desire to like want and desire, pride, things like that. Classifying wanting anything, classifying all of these natural based desires, not to get too weird and like, evolutionary psychology or whatever, but classifying these base desires as fundamentally evil, and then because everyone's going to experience those,
right?
So if you hear that they're evil, you're like, oh my god, I'm evil, and then saying, but it's okay, I have the solution. You just have to believe in Jesus Christ.
That the way that shame should theoretically not exist, but we have it is fully something that the systems of power have created in order to like stay alive, maintain itself. System
of social control.
Right.
As Trixie Mattel once said, shame is a landfill emotion. Ask me what I mean by that.
What do you mean by that?
So if you had just been born and grown up in the woods, you would have never had any sense of shame.
Right.
Shame is something that other people put on you. It's something that you learn. You do something, and other people, you learn through negative reinforcement that is something you should be ashamed of. As ContraPoint's Natalie Wynn once said, shame.
Man, you were citing all the great Trixie Mattel, ContraPoint. I think it's a Katya quote, and we're good to go.
Marx.
Katya. There you go.
Marx, Katya, Trixie Mattel, ContraPoints, Emile Durkheim. These are all my mothers. And I'll say that again. They're
Nietzsche.
my mothers.
Put Nietzsche in there.
Nietzsche. Friend of the pod.
Friend of the pod, Nietzsche.
Friend of the pod, Nietzsche. I know you're watching.
Nietzsche, nice to meet you.
Fred. Okay. So, moving on from...
Fred watching this right now going, oh my god, they're embarrassing me.
So guilt, while we can talk about how it is processed and created naturally in the system of Christianity, it is also important to mention that it can be specifically and intentionally wielded as a tool and weapon against other people.
Weaponization.
And I think that is something that we are probably a lot more familiar with as individuals, because we all know you grow up in Christianity and then you have this guilty malaise that you deal with, or you feel guilty when you shouldn't. But even
now
more
go next to the source.
Exactly. You can specifically pinpoint moments where people made you feel guilty a lot more easily. So I think that guilt is also wielded intentionally as a weapon in Christianity. It's no longer about direct force and exercise of power as it once was 200 years ago or whatever. Since the modern shift, it has to instead force someone to instead of forcing someone to say they've converted and through violence and colonialism and constraint or whatever, make everyone say they're Christian. It doesn't want that, because it's no, it's not about the aesthetics. You have to believe it. You have to want it. You have to feel it. So instead of doing that, it's now you cry in front of them and gnash your teeth and say that you pray for them every night, and your heart breaks at the thought that they'll spend eternity in hell. And then whoever's listening to you is just moved by that emotion. It's you feel so guilty. You're oh my God,
I can't do this to you. I can't hurt you like this.
It makes you feel like you are doing wrong by not sharing their worldview, which is a subtly insidious. One of my favorite words to use on this podcast.
But
insidious.
That is really truly the root of everything Christianity is so insidious.
It literally is. I think guilt is fundamentally tied to a sense of victimhood, because guilt is the tool used by those who want to appear as though they are not strong. I'm going to say that again. Guilt is the tool that people who don't want to appear like they have the power use to manipulate you and the situation.
Are you listening, Charles?
Damn. So if you on a personal individual level, your abuser, your toxic ex, whatever, your bad friend is going to use guilt to try and control your behavior. On a systemic level, religions, political parties, whatever, are going to try to use guilt to control the behavior of a culture. Guilt is the way that you change people's actions and the way that they like think of themselves without appearing like you are actually attempting to control them.
If this was a horror movie, it would be called Bless Your Heart.
Bless your heart.
You know?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's how I could like just that saying is so full of like, to me, just evil, like you said, insidious, because all of, if you're from the South, you know, everything that Bless Your Heart entails, I feel like, is sort of what you're talking about.
I'm going to talk about this a little bit later when we talk about our personal experiences with religious guilt, but yes, definitely, I think a lot of the way that religious guilt like works within the religion is to set up moral superiority, as a lot of the religion does, of like their pain and their agony and their concern comes from a place of moral and intellectual superiority, and the guilt that they're putting on you is because they just know better than you. But we'll get into that more later.
All right.
Because now we're going to move on to some of the lasting effects of religious guilt.
Excellent.
So according to a 2007 article titled Scrupulosity Disorder, an overview and introductory analysis in the Journal of Anxiety Disorders. Religious guilt behaves in many ways, and this is one of the fundamental ways that it behaves, as an anxiety disorder. But specifically, there is a word for like this acute sense of religious guilt that can plague some people. And here's the definition taken from the article, which is, quote, "Scrupulosity is a psychological disorder primarily characterized by pathological guilt or obsession associated with moral or religious issues that is often accompanied by compulsive moral or religious observance and is highly distressing and maladaptive."
You know, that's actually my Facebook bio. I feel so honored when I get to snort. I'm like, yes, I did it.
That's what all of my boyfriends say. Anyways,
hang on,
Mama. Listen. Yeah, your Facebook bio also the back cover of my book. Like it's
tattooed on the heel, baby.
Mama, it's everywhere. So scrupulosity, put it in your dictionary, put it on your like word of the day calendar. It is not technically like in the DSM, but fuck the DSM. You're invalid. We don't support you.
Do we actually not support the DSM?
Oh, you don't know?
I don't know.
Oh, she's been posting really problematic things on Twitter.
Oh my God. Not surprising.
Yeah, listen. Basically, scrupulosity, I think that is an important, first of all, having language to describe something, for all those people who are like, I don't do labels, blah, 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 blah. I love that for you. I support that for you.
All I want is a label. Give me every label.
That, and also the idea of not wanting labels is a privilege that has been won for you by the people who fought to define those identities and establish them within the culture.
Yes.
No assimilationist bullshit here, but you don't need to be prickly at the idea of language itself. Get over yourself.
Slay.
So scrupulosity, I think that is an important way to identify that there is an acute issue that affects a lot of people. This is more specifically for those of us who suffer from acute anxiety concerning those ideas. I think that especially this applies to people who still believe in and are part of the religion, because as much as we as people who have undergone deconstruction can talk about religious guilt and the ways that it still affects us, we need to recognize that religious guilt hurts no one more than the people who are still in that religion.
Oh yeah, that was the end of my relationship with God, I guess is how I'll put it, was some of the most tormenting days of my life.
Yes.
Because I can remember what it was like to still have the belief, but be almost the point of no return.
Yes.
And it was so painful.
Being 13 years old and lying awake, as I've said before, in my bed, crying every night, praying, being like, God, I do not hear you. I do not feel you, but I need to. Please,
I am begging you. Show yourself.
And
we'll talk about that when I do my Julian Baker episode.
Show yourself, bitch. As Elsa once said, show yourself. Mama, my heart, if you happen to be Christian, you're listening to this podcast, first of all, what are you doing here? Second of all, we love you. I hope
Yeah.
that, like, and if you have undergone a lot of this guilt, I am so sorry. You do not deserve that.
No, you don't.
And that is not something that has been put on you by your God. That is not something that's been put on you by us. That is something
It
that's
was
been
put on you by a white man.
By a white man, by abusers in your religion. And I hope that you can escape that in at least in a small part, in the way that we have through deconstruction. Either you through deconstruction or through redefining your relationship with your religion.
Reconstruction, I think is what it's called.
Reconstruction. I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. So, I think that is a good way to understand that is an acute, like, issue. When we say, like, now, important in this definition, they say by compulsive moral or religious observance is the way that, like, it is accompanied by. So, for instance, like, you feel awful about yourself. You do something, you're so concerned. You start praying. You pray. God, I'm so sorry. I know I'm like dirt. I'm a worm of the earth. Please forgive me. Blah, 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 blah.
That prayer of salvation every night.
Prayer of salvation every night. Like things like that. Or going to confession if you're Catholic, stuff like that. But this leads us into the second article, concerning the lasting effects, which I think is even more interesting. A 2012 article titled, "Why Are Religious Individuals More Obsessional? The Role of Mental Control Beliefs and Guilt in Muslims and Christians," in the Journal of Behavioral Therapy and Experimental Psychology. This is an article by Anozi, Karanci, and Clark. And it basically, through so many words, establishes that religious guilt almost exactly resembles a combination of CPTSD, which for those of you who don't know is complex post-traumatic stress disorder, and OCD. So basically, if you are suffering from a lot of religious guilt through Islam or Christianity, then it behaves in your mind and in the ways that it affects your actions, a similar way to obsessive compulsive disorder. You have an obsession, which is like an irrational fear or idea or thought that enters your mind. Oh my God, what if what if I'm homosexual? Oh my God, what if I'm going to hell? Oh my God, what if I'm a fundamentally bad person? Oh my God, what if I've done something wrong that has displeased God? And and it's accompanied by a compulsion, something that you feel like you have no choice but to do so that you can soothe that obsession. Pray, go to confession, read the Bible, pray, like all of these things that you have to do in order to soothe that obsession and soothe that feeling of religious guilt.
That is speaking so much to me. Like I said, whenever I was on that cusp, I dove headfirst into apologetics.
Yes.
I was like, God, I am so sorry. Let me prove to you how much I believe in you by finding ways to counteract every single thing I think.
Yes, exactly. I can remember like being young, and as soon as I started to question Christ, like in religion in general, it made me feel so guilty fundamentally, because there's that period where you swing back and forth of being like, I don't know if I believe it, like or whatever, and then but I do, and I feel it in this moment, and I feel so bad for ever having questioned you. Yeah. And then in those moments when you're back, it's like even questioning him feels so awful, and so you have to find ways to make up for that.
Yeah, and it's crazy because like you feel so guilty about like literally, like you said, things that are out of your control, like logical reasoning, deductive reasoning, being a good person.
Also, let's back this up and bring it back to like my original definition. None of these things are harming anyone.
No.
By any kind of like hedonistic or utilitarian like sense of ethics or morality, you are doing no wrong.
Right.
By like as an individual, changing your beliefs is not an evil thing.
No.
Changing your beliefs or questioning the existence of God.
It really, unless it affects no one but yourself.
It affects no one but yourself. Not only that, that is only a bad thing within the epistemology of the religion,
right?
Which is intentional, because if you have a religion, for instance, in the story of Gideon, that says even questioning or asking God to prove himself is itself a sin, and he doesn't have to, which is just a baked-in part of the religion to say like, well, if you ask him to prove himself and he doesn't, like that's on you, it's not on him, girl. It's gonna.
It's so so because we have both been there where we're like, please show yourself, and then him not doing it, be like, oh my God, what is wrong with me where I can't just accept that he might not do anything.
Yes, exactly.
Me forgiving God for not being there.
Yes. Or all those. Did you ever do that thing where when you were younger you were like, God, if you're real, let an airplane fly over my head right now.
Yes.
Or like, God, if you're real, let there be another like bowl full of Lucky Charms in the pantry, or like anything like that, or like just totally random stuff like, God, if you're real, let a butterfly land on that flower right now, and just doing it over and over. And if nothing happens, you're like, oh well, anyways. But if something happens, you're like, oh, maybe he is real. Maybe this is the sign. Just looking for anything. It's so sad.
Survivor. What's it called? Something bias. Whenever you
confirmation bias.
Yeah, maybe
confirmation
what's
bias.
the word means whenever you were right.
When you were right, but like he widowy was white. He widowy
white the whole time.
Widowy hit the witty. So basically, I want to also talk about in the lasting effects. We have these articles that say like how it behaves mentally. Just from like we know, and also listeners, I hope you understand, it is also deeply concerning the way religious guilt affects people, because it fundamentally teaches, especially children who grow up in the religion, to conceive of the self as broken, detestable, and most importantly, as an unworthy thing.
Yes.
Like you are unworthy of love, you are unworthy of anything. And that grace and love that is given to you is undeserved.
Which is so harmful to the development. As a childhood development, like passion, that is like knowing how every little thing, the smallest thing can affect a child. Now take something huge, like the fact that you are not worthy. That is literally ingrained forever into our brain chemistry.
Literally, like it's literally in your nervous system, embedded in that fucking body, because that's what's keeping the motherfucking score, is the idea that you deserve pain and eternal damnation, and that any ounce of love, forgiveness, like grace that is shown to you is a gift that you don't deserve.
You don't deserve.
You don't deserve.
Anything good that happens to you, you don't deserve.
And like, let's think about that practically. That leads you to accept abusive partners, like in love and romance. That leads you to, you know, like in workplaces, accept like abusive conditions. Basically, this is just the ideology that if abuser created, you know?
Yeah, and it's also which creates, especially people who are still in it, that almost that suffering, addiction to suffering.
Literally, because suffering feels like truth.
And yes, exactly. Like suffering feels like, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be. This is what I deserve.
Exactly. This is what I deserve. And also by suffering, Christianity lionizes suffering, not only because there is a long history in the Christian canon of martyrdom, of like suffering, of dying for the religion or whatever.
Sacrificial,
yeah, which is not experienced, first of fucking all, by modern United States Christians. Fuck y'all, you are not victims. But also because, like, that allows themselves to, again, see themselves as the victim and also see themselves as having the moral high ground. Because if you see yourself as, like...
It's such a dangerous combo.
Such a dangerous combo, because if you think that suffering is going to justify your belief system, because that means... that like if you're suffering for your beliefs, then that means the beliefs must be somehow more meaningful and thus true, then you have just bought into some kind of...
Yes, continue.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, which like leads into that abusive relationship. Because if I am suffering, if I am not happy, if I am emotionally, physically like in pain, then this is the truest form of it. This is the truest form of love.
Exactly. And I want to say, I think it is a beautiful thing to sacrifice and to suffer and to go through pain for what you genuinely believe in. If it is for what you believe in.
Right.
I think that suffering for its own sake, because you think that is going to make you somehow more holy, is not admirable. That is suffering and experiencing pain without any cause.
Yeah.
If you are trying to suffer for the sake of other people or for the sake of a better world or for the sake of anything, that's great. If you are suffering because you think suffering itself somehow improves you as a soul, you are misguided.
Is,
you have bought into an abusive system of like a thought. That is a simple fact.
Oh,
I'm so sorry, y'all, if you are still in that. Also, I think that this for even those who escape the religion, as like you and I can speak to a little bit more in a moment also, this gives you a fundamental sense of wrongdoing and guilt, like that lasts throughout your life. It kind of makes you feel like you are a bad person, even when you're not harming people. Like it also disrupts this normal or healthy patterns of thinking and living and gives you these intrusive, as we discussed with like OCD, thoughts of like, I am evil, or like everything I do is selfish, or like left to my own devices, I will be a bad person, or I will hurt the people that I love, and I need to constantly watch myself and control myself.
I can't trust myself.
Exactly. I need God to tell me what to do because I can't be trusted to tell me what to do.
Not being able to trust my own thoughts and like my own desires and my own wishes is something that plagues me still.
Yes. And I think that's something that plagues all of us to some extent. Of like, we all fundamentally know that our perception of the world is just very one-sided. We all fundamentally know that, like, as people and humans, we are flawed and we are going to do things that hurt other people. That is the difficulty of living. We all know that we hate that to live is to cause harm. But we also have to understand that just because it sounds good that an ideology could solve that doesn't mean that it's actually going to.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that, like, because someone comes along and tells you, like, well, you know, if you want to know what's truly good in the world, then follow this, this, and this. Yeah, mama, they're just preying on that insecurity and fundamental sense of guilt and fear.
That was embedded into them.
Exactly. And it basically, like, as someone who's deconstructed, I know you can speak to this as well, I often will have to, like, become aware of and battle this sense that I am evil and I am wrong. I dropped my paper again.
And that if anyone thinks otherwise, I am somehow deceiving them.
That part especially. Like, if anyone thinks that I am a good person or that I am worthy of love, I have tricked them.
Yes.
And I need to prove them wrong.
Yeah.
I need to show them that they're wrong.
And it's only a matter of time before they realize how disgusting I am.
Yes. I remember constantly, I think of what's the fucking Amazing Grace, which is one of the most popular hymns of all time. Yeah. It's like, a wretch like me or a worm like me. Yeah. This idea that we are wretches and disgusting that travels over what, even when you've escaped the religion, into interpersonal relationships in a way that is really distressing. Because if you are constantly having to battle the idea that you are broken and that you are hurting the people around you and that you are evil, then it's going to put an undue burden on those around you to affirm to you, like, no, you're not evil. Yeah. No, you're not hurting me, like you are, like, blah, 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 blah. And no one wants to feel that way, and no one wants to make other people do that for them.
Yes.
So it's
which leads to more guilt.
It's a cycle.
Yeah.
Mama, as all good and terrible things in this life are, it's cyclical.
It's not only a snake, you know, eating itself around. It is also a dog chasing its tail because it's it happens so fast.
Yeah, and it's a gay man on Twitter sucking his own dick.
Same thing. Only three genders.
The three horsemen of the apocalypse.
A snake eating itself, a dog chasing its tail with a gay man sucking his dick.
Phallic.
You were one of them.
You tag yourself. I'm the gay man sucking his own dick.
I think I'm the dog chasing its tail.
Okay, if you are the serpent that's devouring itself, hit me up, girl.
Where are my serpents at? Where are my serpents at?
Where my serpents at? Where my serpents at? Where my people at? Roxy Andrews, shout out. Friend of the pod, Roxy Andrews. We know you're watching, Roxy. We love you.
Friend of the pod,
you're Roxy Andrews, and you're here to make it clear you love gay girls. Good God.
That's why we brought you here.
So, this brings us to one of the last things that I think that, like, to touch on specifically in the conversation about religious guilt, which is personal experience with religious guilt. Ooh.
You mean talking about ourselves?
Yeah. Oh my God. There's nothing that we like to do more than self-mythologize.
Yes.
So I noticed you grabbed my hand. Do you feel how swampy she is?
It feels like South Louisiana in the middle of July.
Is that a line from I was going to say Rugrats.
I made that up.
Okay, well. So, personal experience. I think that we've discussed the way that this affects us. We both can relate to the idea that generally it gives you the sense of being like a fundamentally bad person, growing up in an ideology that tells you that's what you are. But I think that I don't know. Let me give you an example.
Word?
As children, I come from a big family. It was me and like 3 siblings growing up for a long time, and then later a 4th sibling of mine came along. So there was a lot of us, and there was like a mom and a dad. I was lucky enough to grow up in a 2 like parent household, and my father was a pastor, et cetera, et cetera. One of the first verses that we learned as children, which that should say something that as children we were being taught to memorize Bible verses or whatever.
That was a core part of our week.
Yes, of being a small child learning how to speak. The first verse that we were taught, especially my oldest sister, I remember, was Jeremiah 17:9. The heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. Who can know it? That was the first verse that we would learn because our parents were like, it's the first thing you need to know. And the next one, the wages of sin is death.
But the gift of God is eternal life.
Exactly.
The gift.
Exactly. The gift of God.
It is given to you, and you should be thankful for it.
And when the idea that the wages of sin is death, combined with the idea that we are born sinful, Additionally, with the other verse, the heart is deceitful above all things. As a child, you're just learning, oh, I'm evil. Oh, I'm a liar. Oh,
so
I'm wicked.
Anything that I tell myself, anything that I think is not to be trusted, it is trying to lead me astray away from God, which also becomes confusing because, like, whose voice am I hearing?
Exactly. That's another thing.
Mistrust.
Most importantly, I think in religious guilt, one of the most insidious and evil things about it is that it co-ops the beautiful, like, cultural, social construct that we have of a consciousness, like a conscience that we each have, like that moral, like, compass in your mind. It corrupts that, calls it the voice of God, and then manipulates it into guilting you for things that you should not feel guilty about. So that voice in your head, the voice of your father when you're a preacher's daughter, all become the voice of God.
Right.
And that is why I think in studies it really resembles OCD, because these, like, you know, little guilty thoughts every now and then that normally pop up in people suddenly have the weight, the gravitas of eternal life and death.
Yes.
And they should not.
It is everything.
It's everything.
And I'll talk about that whenever I do my episode on Julian Baker's album Turn Out the Lights.
Ooh.
Talking about whenever you lose that ability to identify that voice in your head that you have come to know as God, the voice of God.
Yes.
It's like, well, who was that all along? Who
Exactly.
How can I name this thing now that I know it's not this? Like, was I alone this whole time?
Yes. Okay. Not to hijack your discussion about that album in our next episode, but
we'll talk about it again.
Speaking in terms of religious guilt now, as someone who is, like, deconstructed and is deconstructing, what does it look like for you to identify what parts of that voice were religious guilt and to extricate that, and to identify what parts of that are just you, and to, like, is there even a difference?
What I've been communicating with you and Sam a lot recently is, like, this feeling of I cannot trust the decisions I'm making. I am in the middle of that right now because I am very early on in my deconstruction comparatively. I first started to swing on that pendulum in January of 2021, and I really truly did not see it. I passed the point of no return whenever I got married. That was my point of no return, because I was accepting that, like, you know, I am not going to live this life, you know, in the church.
I think that was interesting because it's like it was what put you past the point of no return is the idea that you entered into, like, a marriage, which is so sacred in Christianity, in a thing that you were not psychologically thinking of as the sacred Christian ritual.
Right. Right. And so, yeah. And I think that was, and you can say what you want. Like, I got married very young, but that needed to happen, because if that had not happened, I would still be clinging on to something that wasn't there. So it's really only been a year into it. And I've spent most of this summer trying to just realize how culty it all is. And now I'm at the point of picking out my behaviors. And I'm like, okay, so if God is no longer there to guide me, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
And like, all I've ever been taught is I can't make decisions for myself. Yeah. I can't be the one in charge of my own life. And so, yeah, I'm in the middle of that right now, trying to decide who to listen to up here, because also Christianity can create complex personality stress disorder, which my therapist taught me about parts theory, which is your brain divides into parts whenever it experiences trauma. And so religious trauma creates this part somewhere inside of me. There is something that is the moral part of me, or the part that is most guiding me, that once was occupied by a part of myself that I called God. Yes.
Yeah, that is a beautiful, powerful, and, like, accurate way to put it. Shout out to your therapist. Like,
thanks, Katie.
That part of yourself, like, we all have different parts of ourselves that are caused by traumatic events, traumatic experiences, and traumatic systems. Like, you fundamentally, Mama, I don't know if you've heard this recently, but you contain multitudes.
My favorite. Anytime that I'm like, listen, I contain multitudes. I'm full of contradictions. There are many parts of me.
Hey, Kayla, I have a quick question for you.
Yes.
What do you contain?
Multitudes,
Mama, and so do you. And
which is also religious guilt, because whenever I first hear that, I was like, I thought of that demon that said, they call me Legion because because he was like 1,000 demons. I contain multitudes, and they're all demons.
We are Legion, bitch. We are Legion.
I don't contain multitudes. I am Legion.
That's me on Twitter with, like, 6 different names for my different porn accounts. I am Legion. No, but like different parts of you are fundamentally like separated from other parts and then given, I think, lended different levels of authority, moral authority when it comes to living your life. So the part of you that is like what you once called God and are now identifying as like the part of you shaped by religious guilt or like whatever is given far more authority once you are still within the religion to dictate your behavior than it ever should be. Because that is a part of you that has been, I don't want to say mainly shaped by, let's say is reacting to religious trauma. And so I think that the only way in deconstruction to counteract that is to like specifically identify that part of yourself and to engage with it in terms of not just trying to make it shut up, but to saying like you are reacting in a way like, and thus I am reacting in a way that like is not justified and does not make sense. Be gentle with yourself. Be gentle with that part of yourself.
Which I am having to learn.
Yes,
because I want to just grab that part of me and be like, shut the fuck up.
Yes.
Leave me alone. But I can't talk to her. Because again, it's me.
It's
I have
you.
to be like I have to be like, hey. So.
Approaching quietly with a carrot.
Hey, God.
Hey, girl.
Hey, God. You're actually just me in a wig. I don't know how to tell you this, but look in the mirror.
As Ariana Grande, friend of the pod, once said...
No.
Oh, no, we hate you, Ariana Grande. As Ariana Grande once said, God is a woman. And by that we mean, God is me in a wig.
God is me in a wig.
God is me in a wig. It really is, though. Like, you do have to approach it, like, gently and say, okay, this part of myself that I felt was, like, God trying to lead me in the right direction, that I felt was, like this divine sense of guilt and inferiority, it's really just fear. It's this small abused child that sat in the front pew listening to my father say that I was evil, that is so afraid and just wants me to be loved and wants me to be okay, trying to say, please don't do that. I'm afraid that doing that is going to make me like be punished. And you need to say, it's okay. We are safe. You're not going to be punished. No one's going to hurt
everything
you.
You are safe is a big thing.
I love you. Other people love you.
And that is the irony of it all, because the only person who can take you on that journey and get you away from that place is yourself, when the system is telling you that is the one person that you are not allowed to trust.
Exactly. Exactly, bitch. And that is why the system tells you that's the only person that you can't trust.
Because you and it to get all sappy, you yourself are in control of your life. You are the one who has autonomy. You are the one who can control how you feel about yourself, how you interact with people, how you see the world. And that is what I think Christianity has done, is it tries to make everyone by the system of indoctrination, it is trying to make everyone follow the same thing that, it feeds into itself. And if you learn to trust yourself, you no longer need that. And if you no longer need that, the system falls apart.
Exactly. Bitch, not you eating me up on my own episode. Okay.
Listen, this is me crossfaded.
Kale smokes 2 bowls and me be like, so you've read theory, however, I'm a girl.
So me smoking 2 bowls being like, the bit is just narration of your life.
So the fundamental nature of the bit is storytelling. Do you have any like specific experiences? Like, I was always taught that verse growing up, and so were my siblings. Do you have any specific experiences in your life that you feel like kind of represent religious guilt?
Yes, and it really leans back into everything I've been saying. It is trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not upon your own understanding.
Yes,
that was a VBS song. It was, I'm gonna trust in God with all my heart, no matter what, no matter where, no matter when. I won't lean on my understanding, and just saying that it takes courage to trust God, and it takes courage to deny yourself makes you feel so guilty. It may, like, if you don't follow this part of yourself that you call God, then you're a coward. You are weak.
Yes.
You are, yeah. And so I guess that my guilt normally came from me just feeling like I was so powerless and I was so small, and that is my fault.
Yes.
Because I didn't trust enough. Because if I trusted in God, then I would have, I can do all things through Christ. And if I only trusted in God, then then these things wouldn't plague me anymore.
Exactly. Which is in so many different ways, and like it comes up in so many different ways, is the just world fallacy. Is a fundamental like component of Christianity. The idea that like all that happens is God's will. And that opens up so many doors for destructive patterns of belief and thinking, because that means anything bad that happens, God wanted that to happen. Anything good that happens, God wanted that to happen.
Yeah.
So it's like this victim blaming mindset of like, if something bad happens to you, well, God wanted it to happen. If something like,
Yeah, exactly. And also the saying that gets thrown around, me and Sam both like remember our parents telling us is that you reap what you sow. That's part of the Bible, and saying anything that comes back to you is something that you brought upon yourself. So which just, especially as two bitches who are mentally ill, whenever
I don't know what you're talking about.
I
don't know what you're talking about.
Pardon me, as this bitch who is mentally ill, you were perfectly normal. You were sane. You were valid.
Yeah. You know what? You smell like hospital, bitch.
I smell like grippy socks. Whenever I was, what was I talking about?
I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine. This is expected of me. I have ADHD.
As two bitches who are mentally ill.
Oh yes, as two bitches mentally ill. Whenever I was, you say, coming of age into my mental illness, puberty as a bipolar BPD bitch,
girl.
Every single heartbreak, and like I've talked about many times, I was chronically single, and And it's taught that usually you meet the person you're going to marry in high school. You marry your high school sweetheart. You like it is kind of given that if you do everything right, God will reward you with love.
Ooh, that is a powerful idea. Yeah.
And so much of my life, because it took me so long to like, I was the call a late bloomer, but to me I was not ready to be loved. And that was because there was something inside of me I needed to fix. And because I talked about last week with rapture anxiety, because I found it so hard to believe, I was like, oh my God, if I cannot fix my belief, if I cannot surrender myself to God and just let him live and just fully believe, until I do that, I'm going to be alone.
Yeah.
And I felt like that for 20 years of my life.
And you deserved it.
Thank you. I know.
I think that's truly awful that Christianity like puts that on people and puts that on you. And I also think that's an interesting parallel in that one thing I do think is a valid criticism of like the modern, I would say both liberalism and leftism, is like that, especially on online spaces, there is hyper-moralist tendencies. And in any hyper-moralist system, it's like there's this idea you can't, how are you going to love yourself and how are you going to love somebody until you love yourself?
How are you going to love somebody else before you love yourself?
Exactly. Of like, you should not date.
Sorry, Paul.
You should not date until you've gone to therapy. Like, people, instead of saying like, ooh, they're evil, will be like, ooh, they need to go to therapy.
The idea that you need to be fixed before you are able to, have a relation, have a connection with someone.
Exactly. And also, there's a YouTube channel, The Leftist Cooks. In one episode, they talk about how, with leftist chefs, I forget, they talk about how in the left, mental illness is almost being constructed as the new morality. To say like, you need to go to therapy is almost to say like, you're a bad person.
Saying like, you haven't dealt with your trauma yet.
Exactly. And like,
which is also such a place of privilege.
Which is fucking fucked. Yeah. Like, oh, you have the resources and the time and the support system to work through your trauma. Great. You know what you should do with that? Talk down to the people who don't. That's a great way to do it.
I'm very fortunate, and it probably would be possible right now, but there was a point in my life where I could finally go to therapy for about a 6-month period, and that alone, and I am so privileged to have had that because it was so useful.
Yes.
It is so, like you said, it's so sick how, because of the way capitalism works, is constantly looking for like some sense of morality and some higher ground, and using therapy of all things, which is there's like a whole thing happening right now about I don't remember what it's called, positive affirmation, like in therapy becoming like a toxic thing, which that's it. I have thoughts on like the glorification of therapy.
Mama,
And I'm guilty of it, but because it was so helpful to me.
Well, not just the glorification. I would almost say like the fetishization of therapy.
Yeah.
Like instead of like therapy, it's reified in this way that it becomes flattened. Like when people start talking about therapy now, they're not even actually
their
really.
Therapist becomes God.
Yeah. They're not even actually also like talking about therapy as a material reality. They're talking about the idea of therapy.
Yeah.
The cultural like phenomenon of therapy. Like, oh, there was something wrong with me, but I went to therapy. Or like, oh, I'm a man, but I went to therapy. Like whatever.
So I'm healed. I'm clean.
I'm clean, I'm pure, yay.
Which looks exactly like religious trauma.
Exactly.
Which is a fear that I have, is that as one, with our generation, it might have been religious trauma, but with the next generation, it could be like, it's still going to be religious trauma, but just shaped in a different way.
Yeah, exactly. I would also say another like personal experience of mine, I think, which we discussed recently, of like the way, I think this speaks, as we were talking about earlier, more to like the way that guilt is weaponized in specific ways. But like, I don't know. Family members constantly say that they're praying for me, that like, I'll pray for you, or bless your heart, as we were talking about earlier. That's the way that's like weaponized. In fact, like one reached out recently to say that like, they were always going to be there for me, and they compared me to the prodigal son. Oh my God. And they said like, oh, like they're going to be there for me no matter what. And I think that is kind of the insidious nature of the like weaponization of Christian guilt, because it positions the self as like pure and righteous and importantly sacrificial, and it constructs the other as like misguided and beneath them somehow. Yeah. Like I know what's good for you more than you do, and you should be ashamed for denying it.
Yeah, and when you and I were first, because we both, whenever we were in early stages of our friendship, talked about the fact that we might go back to Christianity, and I think that was because for a long time, we just kind of saw this as a phase. We saw ourselves as, going astray, and that, eventually we would go back to the fold.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so that is what, like, that's what's insidious about it. Is like, I'll be here when you're ready.
I'll be here when you're ready.
Because
I'm waiting for you.
Because I'm waiting for you.
I'm waiting for you, bitch. Mm-hmm. And that makes me a good person, and that means I know better than you.
Yeah.
For my family members to see me like depressed, lonely, actively fucking, not to get too serious on the pod, but like depressed, lonely, actively suicidal, like living within Christianity, and then to see me leave and live as, not to be too trans, but my true authentic self, and to be happy for the first time, and then to say, I know what's better for you. You were better in Christianity.
Yeah, your life was better whenever you like could not bear the thought of being alive.
Yeah, the better thing for you was the thing that almost killed you.
Yeah.
Because that's how I believe life should be lived.
Fuck
you, first of all.
Which just creates this toxic relationship with the idea of suffering, but saying like, I am not living my best life unless I am not doing, like, I can only, which comes back to like the feeling of I can't create art, or I can't be productive unless I am suffering.
Yes. And also like, it also allows others to discount your suffering.
Yeah.
Like for a family member to be like, so you wanted to die when you were in Christianity, but at least you weren't fucking queer,
Yeah.
Like, so come back and suffer and live in the light. Like, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Jesus Christ. Literally.
Yeah. The other thing I will say is sort of like you were saying, the feeling, another way that religious guilt has contextualized in my life is the feeling that I am in charge of the well-being of others.
Yes.
Because I knew that I could only please my family, and I could only let them have peace if they knew that I was right with God.
Yes.
Or that I was in the fold, which has caused me to be like, oh, okay, so my actions and the way that I feel, if I'm anything that I feel is affecting the people around me.
Yes. It causes you to have this undue responsibility, which is also, this might just sound like typical like childhood trauma or like CPTSD issues or whatever, because it behaves exactly the same. The two are inextricably linked. Christianity is just the canvas upon which it is like projected, because you become responsible for their emotions, you become responsible for their behavior, because like it is an illusion of control, like we were talking about before the podcast, of like, as a child, you cannot understand that there are things in the world that are just beyond your control. You think that the way everyone is acting around you is a product of your behavior. So if you are being loved, great, you're doing something wrong. If something is going wrong, you feel like it's because you did something wrong. You are evil. And that means, and the comforting thing is that gives you control, that you can learn to do what's right.
Right.
And so that's an easy thing to believe, and that's an easy pattern of thought to retain throughout life. And it's also a self-effacing, self-abusing, guilt-ridden system of ideology.
Yes. Well, anyway, so you take card? Because again, revelation on this podcast.
Mama, life-changing revelations.
Yes.
Jude and Revelations.
Jude and
Miss Jude.
Speaking of Bible verses, think of books of the Bible. Pardon me.
Okay.
Are you ready for a verse of the day?
I would love nothing. Oh. So the tequila. I would love nothing more than a verse of the day.
Well, so I'm going back to another emo Kale verse, obviously, because I'm just a little emo today.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yes.
This is how you dress every day.
Exactly, maybe.
Hard side part.
Hard side part. I'm going to go back to a little depressed Kale verse.
Okay.
First, I want to read, I'm going to be skipping around in chapter 143. I want to read verse 4, and then I'm going to read 7 and 8. So, my spirit is weak within me. My heart is overcome with dismay. I'm going to read all of this. I remember the days of old, and I meditate what you have done, and I reflect on the work of your hands. I spread my hands out to you, and I am parched land before you. Enter me quickly, Lord. My spirit fails. Do not hide your face from me, and I will be like those going down into the pit. Let me experience your faithful love in the morning, for I trust you. Reveal to me the way I should go, because I long for you. And if this verse does not fully explain David's religious guilt,
I think that is a perfectly apt verse for today. Yeah.
Yes, because this is constantly like if I go back through all of the verses that I highlighted in my Bible, it was always yearning like, God, reveal to me your love for me, answer me quickly. Like my spirit is growing weak, I am growing tired of waiting for you, but I know this is like my own doing, and if I keep feeling like this, I'm gonna go to hell.
Yes.
I'm finna be in the pit.
Oh, word? We in the pit? We in the pit.
That video of that girl saying, I'm finna be in the pit.
I'm finna be in the pit.
David, when he was in a full depression, I'm finna be in the pit.
I'm finna be in the pit. David.
Religious guilt. I'm finna be in the pit.
David, 50 AD. I'm gonna be in the pit.
So that is my verse of today, and I think, yeah, like I said, Kale speaks a lot. Looking back now, I can see young Kale clinging onto that religious guilt, and we're still seeing that something is wrong with her.
Yes, I don't know, like the beauty and the tragic elegy of that verse is so like, that really strikes me, because these people thousands of years ago were experiencing the same fucking like
David of all people,
allegedly
David
was experiencing the same like negative impacts, and also the same like cognition, the same thought patterns like that was caused by this religious like ideology, you know, like this like, please remind me, show me, teach me, lead me,
begging, because you're like, you don't know what to do if he doesn't.
Won't you?
Which I'll talk about. Little spoiler for next week.
let me help you in.
Like that feeling sort of ties in what we'll talk about next. Is once you don't have that anymore, it is a heartbreak like no other.
Yes. I think one thing we've discussed at length, and that we can really never talk enough about, is that the gap, like the hole in your heart and in your life that is left through deconstruction, is impossible to fill.
Which is the point.
Exactly. It is the point, because the thing that left that hole should have never been there.
And it's shame.
And
it's guilt.
It's shame. It's guilt. It's a sense of a wrongdoing. It's an idea that you were wrong. You were outside of the thing that you were meant to be inside of. It is a hole, and it's never, I'm just a hole, sir.
It reminds me of that Bastille song, Flaws. There's a hole in my soul. Can you feel it? I can't feel it.
I love Bastille. Me too. Oh my God!
We're so gay.
We're so gay. But you know who else is gay?
Who's gay?
Girl, God is gay all the time.
And all the time, God is gay.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.
Thank you so much for listening to Gay Girls Good God.
And as always, we have a big shout out to Brother Sam, our music minister, for creating that lovely intro and outro that you hear.
If you would like to get more of Gay Girls Good God or contribute yourself to the content, you can go ahead and find us on Instagram and DM us there to tell us your own experiences or stories about your Christianity or religion in general. You can also email us at gaygirlsgoodgod@gmail.com.
And if you like the show at the service today, make sure that you subscribe to us on Spotify, leave a like on YouTube, and if you love the show, why don't you bring a friend next week for us?
And as always, all the time, God is gay.
And God is gay all the time.